This week on Information Technology Leaders, Annika Andrews, Vice President of Business Development and Information Technology for Northwest Hospital. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the Vice President of Business Development and Information Technology for Northwest Hospital. Right after college, she moved from the East Coast to the West Coast and had trouble finding a job. Once she found a spot at Northwest Hospital, she quickly impressed those around her. In 4 years, she had earned the CIO title, and she's still moving up on the same steep curve. When asked where people expect to see her in 5 years, the answer is always the same: anywhere she wants. Please welcome Annika Andrews. Where did you grow up?
In Providence, Rhode Island.
And what was that like?
It was very nice. I really enjoyed it. It's right near the campus of Brown University, and my parents are mathematicians, so I enjoyed Providence.
What are some of the things that influenced you in terms of making you the person you are today from there?
Well, I think that my childhood was unique in a couple ways. We grew up without a TV, which I think really, in retrospect, really did shape my childhood. It wasn't always a good thing. I think today, I admire parents who didn't have a TV, but it was really difficult being a child that didn't have TV.
Why?
Everyone else had TV, and as a child, I think you have a natural instinct to want to be like everybody else, and everyone else had a TV, and while they were watching TV, we had to find other things to do. But I think in the long term, it was probably really good for me. I went to public school, which I think was a wonderful experience, and not only educationally, but a lot of the strength of my personality probably came from a pretty rough public school environment. Mm-hmm.
You said that your parents were both mathematicians. What did they do?
They were professors at Brown of pure mathematics, so not an applied science, a pure science, and a very academic environment that we grew up in.
Yet you decided you did not want academia. Why did you make that decision so early on and so firmly?
I think there's a natural tendency to rebel against sort of what your parents are, not because you don't admire it or enjoy it. But definitely while my parents are very theoretical, I am very practical, and that's where it really led me to enjoy working.
What were you like in high school?
I was devoted to rowing, so I was a competitive rower, and that took up a significant portion of my time. I was very studious. I did well in school, probably without spending a lot of time at school, and it was pretty easy for me. I really enjoyed the Providence Public Schools had a program where if you got far enough ahead, you could go and take college classes, and I enjoyed that primarily as a way to get out of school. Mm-hmm. So I think that my high school days were pretty much focused on rowing and sort of getting through.
Did that give you any sort of leadership opportunities when you were doing rowing?
Oh, definitely. Rowing, teaches you competitive sports. I think not just rowing, but especially rowing teaches you a lot of things. Leadership-wise, it can be done either as an individual sport or as a team sport, and I also spent some time coaching and mentoring others and teaching other people to row as a summer job in addition to training. So that was sort of my early leadership, and then I went on to manage the rowing program. So I guess in retrospect, that was my early management skills.
Beginning to do that a little bit. Very different from the academic
Definitely.
endeavor.
Mm-hmm. And my parents have no athletic interests, so I think, again, rowing was something that I just took up on my own and got out there.
How did you find rowing of all the sports?
My parents are quite frugal, and we happened to live near a boathouse that had a program that taught children to row, which is a wonderful time to teach someone to row because you're lightweight and your balance is much better. So it was a really convenient thing, and my mom didn't drive, so it was easy for me to get to the boathouse. It was within walking distance of our house.
Your mother didn't drive?
No,
I thought only people in Manhattan didn't drive.
No, she rides a bicycle.
Are you serious?
Absolutely.
That's great.
Everywhere. As I said, they're a bit eccentric. Yes.
Funny. Where did you go to college?
I went to Princeton University in New Jersey.
What made you decide to go there?
Well, one, I wanted to row, and they have a wonderful competitive rowing program. And secondly, I think, I was attracted to the idea of getting out of Providence. I could have gone to Brown and stayed closer to home, but there was definitely an independent streak in me. I was really looking forward to getting away from home.
Well, and also going to Brown would not only be staying at home, but going to the place where your parents are.
Yep, and I really just wanted to get out and be on my own, and Princeton was a good choice for that.
Okay. What was the Princeton experience like?
I think coming from a public school in Providence, Rhode Island, Princeton was much less diverse. Some people go to college and find it to be a broader experience. I didn't find, coming from my background, it wasn't. And yet it was a wonderful, much more challenging academic environment for me. I'd been able to sort of skate by pretty easily in high school and through the years. And Princeton, there were, 1,000 other very bright little kids like myself, and so I had to pay a little more attention.
Did that surprise you?
No, it didn't surprise me. I expected it, and it worked out fine.
Because I had it the other way around. I went through a private high school, and where even if you were smart, you still weren't in the top 10%. And then I went to a public college, and I found it easy, which was unusual.
I found it, and there were certain subjects where I found it to be much more challenging than others. We had a very strong high school biology program, and so I was very well prepared there. We had an incredibly weak chemistry program in high school, and by comparison, I found chemistry to be just really challenging. I was behind the curve. Everyone else had a better foundation than I did.
What did you decide to major in?
Economics, and I chose that because it was a nice mix of, it used a good number of my mathematical skills, which I was, sort of genetically good at mathematics, and but econ was much more applied, and while Princeton doesn't have any professional schools, economics was sort of the closest thing towards the applied world.
So you knew you wanted to go into business, quote unquote?
Yeah, business, quote unquote, including healthcare. I had an interest in sort of the health sciences from an early age, and while I don't think I could have said exactly what I was going to do, it interested me.
Is there anything in college you wish you'd taken more advantage of?
Without a doubt, I think I would say that there was an incredible academic experience there that it was wasted on someone like myself and many others. I look back at the time, and we just spent so much time wasting time sitting around and fiddling around with things and dawdling and procrastinating. But you learn lots of things while you're there, in addition to things you learn in the classroom, and so I enjoyed the experience. I think it was good.
And in a lot of ways, I think all that dawdling is part of what you're there for as well. You don't get as much dawdle time once you leave college.
No, though I was thinking about that in preparation today. I was thinking that some of that procrastination is still in us when at 11:30 last night we started our taxes. So some of it doesn't grow out.
No.
But
did you continue to row in
yes,
college?
I rowed in college for the first 3 years, and then my back really was hurting, and decided to take a year and not row any longer. And I think having spent so much energy on it in high school, I perhaps was a little tired of it by then.
Did you find that the high school rowing experience was very different from the college?
Very different.
How so?
Mainly because in high school I was rowing sculling, so I was rowing in a scull by myself or in a double. And in your collegiate programs, you most of the time rowing a sweep shell, and that's more of a team sport. It was a different thing. I also, you get mixed in with a lot of other people who are just learning to row, so the freshman year of rowing really takes everyone from a novice stage to everyone learning up to a common platform. And then after that, I enjoyed it, and it was a great experience, and I certainly would do it again.
Did you work at all during college?
No, not during the school year.
But during the summers?
Yep, during the summers I worked as a mix of rowing coach and later in a health research firm.
Okay. How did you find that sort of internship summer job?
I found it from a woman that I had been babysitting for. So in addition to coaching a lot of rowing, I was doing a lot of babysitting. I really enjoyed it, always did it throughout my teenage years to make a little money. And the woman that I'd been babysitting for asked me what I was going to continue to do, and told me a little bit about what she was working on, and I said, if there's ever a spot, I'd really be interested in working there. And so the following summer, she was able to set me up with an internship working in the firm, and it was a firm that specialized on we did a lot of research in the maternal and child health area.
Which is an area you obviously had some level of interest in. And what were the kind of projects that you worked on?
We did a project looking at how to screen and prevent alcohol and tobacco use in pregnant and postpartum women. We also looked at research study funded by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Association on the use of surfactant in premature infants and how effective that was.
And what was your role in that?
I did a lot of data analysis. Those were sort of early computerization data manipulation days, but being young and while I don't think I knew anything specific about computers, I was certainly capable of learning quickly, and so I did a lot of the data analysis preparation for the study.
Did you take any computer classes in college?
A couple. I couldn't remember whether it's more than one or just one very long one, but
Sometimes they feel very long.
Yes, on programming in C and basic algorithms, and it was a great class. Really enjoyed it.
Did you find that any of that was useful when you got into the internship, or?
Limitedly. Some of it was useful, and then I did a fair amount of database work, sort of learning on my own that I really needed for both that internship and subsequently for my thesis project at Princeton.
And the woman that you worked for sort of became a mentor to you. Was that a formal relationship or an informal relationship, that kind of mentorship concept?
It was pretty informal, but she certainly saw it as something that she enjoyed doing and would call me, check on me. She was there to give me advice if I needed it. And I remember during my senior year talking to her several times about what would be some good topics to write my senior thesis on. Princeton has a real commitment. One of the unique aspects of their undergraduate education is that every senior does an independent thesis, and it's a hallmark of the Princeton education. And it can be a daunting task. It's a long project, and I remember speaking with her about what kind of topics could I do, and what would be an interesting research question to take up.
And did this start to give you the idea of how different people can kind of help you through your career and how to kind of manage that?
Oh, definitely. She was a wonderful mentor, and even the work experience in that office during that summer was a learning experience for me. Some people resented having a little pipsqueak intern in, and others were very helpful and wanted to show me around. So I experienced a mix of reaction. How
did you handle the more negative reaction?
I can't remember exactly how I handled it that summer. I remember being uncomfortable and that it was difficult, but I sort of muddled on and realized that was to be expected, that you weren't going to be best buds with everyone at work.
And good practice,
yes,
actually. So then you graduate from school, and what made you move to the West Coast?
Well, during my junior and senior year, I met my husband, my later-to-be husband, and we were not married, but Eric got a job here in the Seattle area, and we knew we would leave Princeton and move all across the country. So it was a kind of a leap of faith to come out here. We didn't have any ties to the area. We were both from the East Coast, but he got this job, and we weren't really sure what else to do. So out we came.
Were you excited about the move originally?
I think when I was in Princeton, I was excited about the move. I think I was a bit less excited once I got here.
Why is that?
Growing up on the East Coast is, particularly in New England, it's older. I grew up in an old home. Things were built, 100 years ago, and we landed in Redmond, where, it's a much newer community. I was also separated. I felt like every single human being that I'd met my entire life we had left behind, and I wasn't sure we'd really ever see him again. It's just very isolating. And Eric, my husband, was new on the job. He was working dawn to dusk, and of course we had no money at all, so it wasn't like I was out enjoying the summer. Now today I think, oh, not working, I could endlessly think of things to do, but that wasn't the case then.
And how did your first time looking for a job go?
Difficult. It was pretty rocky. Again, didn't know anyone and wasn't really quite sure where to start. And the alumni network of my college was primarily focused on the East Coast and helping in the career office and undergraduate placement, again, focused on getting you a job on the East Coast, not in Seattle, Washington. So, I primarily turned to looking at the newspaper ads, and I did send some letters. Princeton has an alumni network that I tried to use a little bit of, but primarily months passed and I still had no job. It was very difficult to read the help wanted ads. They all ask for experience, and particularly in health-related fields, they all want health-related experience. And or at least that's what the ad said, and that was a real discouraging aspect for me to apply. I just felt, well, I don't have that experience, so I can't really apply. And Everyone wanted to know if I'd gone to the University of Washington, and I hadn't, so that was sort of didn't help me at all, and I wasn't sure what to do.
You learned some interesting things about yourself during this time. What were some of those things?
Well, it was a little bit of a lonely period, and so I really, I just distinctly remember a day when I was doing a lot of running for exercise and to pass the time, and I remember thinking, well, I've really just got to learn to enjoy this time, and it makes me stronger, and I'm going to be by myself, so I better get used to it and like it.
Had you not had much alone time?
Not really. I'd always been surrounded by my family and my friends, and my parents were around, so.
In retrospect, what should you have done to facilitate the job search? You said that you mostly just used newspaper ads and went from there.
I think I'd have been a little more aggressive about sending out my resume, calling people more frequently. I was very new and hadn't really had a lot of career counseling, so I would send off my resume and wait. And wait and wait. And I don't know in retrospect, I can't remember what I was doing while I was waiting other than kind of loafing around and watching CNN. So I think, if I were to do it again today, I'd be a little more go get 'em, really out networking and using the downtime in between interviews or between ads that look reasonable to perhaps volunteer or get involved in the community just to make more contacts.
Yeah, to start building the network. I think that you can't reinforce how important it is to have that network and to build it and to use it, because that's where most jobs come from.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, I think volunteering, I would really recommend volunteering, particularly in a tight economy. People are hesitant to hire, and volunteering, there are a lot of places where you can volunteer, and particularly in health-related fields, we have a lot of volunteers. And I've hired several good people, I was telling you, that who started out as volunteers. I found them in the hospital working as volunteers, and they probably aren't people that I would have hired had I just seen their resume.
Right.
But once you get to know them and you realize, oh, this person would be great at this, and you can find a spot for them.
And I think it's so exponential, because once you sort of get out of your house, I mean, I know you didn't have a TV growing up, but watching CNN must have been great.
Oh, it was wonderful.
But you find if you just sit in your house, you're not going to meet somebody who might know somebody who might know somebody else. So you just kind of cut all of that off, and I think sometimes it gets so dark you can't even see those things.
It was a really gloomy period. To this day, when my husband thinks about, sometimes we talk about whether I should continue to work, and the thought to him, his recollections of that period is, oh, there's no way we're going to have you stay home again. The last time you did that, you were nuts.
Right.
Different
person now, but still. So you finally landed a job.
I got a job.
Tell us about the job.
Well, a woman named Ann Shumway Cook hired me to be a research assistant. She was a PhD and also a physical therapist, and she had research grants on evaluating the impact that exercise could have on the elderly and their balance. And it was a wonderful project. It was a nice research project, and it also let me get started on work. And she was a wonderful woman to work for, and I really have a lot to thank her for, and that I wouldn't be where I was today if she hadn't given me the job.
And she sort of gave you a chance, and she was at Northwest Hospital.
And she was at Northwest. She's no longer there, but she was at Northwest.
Did she find the fact that you'd been unemployed for 6 months something that sort of worked against you, or was that not a big deal?
I don't ever remember her really asking about it. I think she just wrote it off to I was fresh out of college and relocated to a very different part of the country.
Did you feel qualified to do this job? Did you feel comfortable starting it?
Yes, I think I did. There were some aspects of the direct patient interaction. The research project involved screening the patient and seeing what their lifestyle was like, and then introducing them, putting them on an exercise program, and then reassessing them. And so the direct patient contact was certainly something new for me, and it was also a lot of work with the elderly, which was a real eye-opener for me. At that particularly, I was really young, and I don't know, unless you've been exposed to an elderly relative, you probably haven't spent that much time with the elderly.
Yeah, it is very different in terms of how you
very different, and I remember coming
them.
home being really, really sad just at how difficult the aging process is, and it was rough.
Yeah. So you moved from one of the best-funded universities in the country to a public institution. Was that transition difficult?
It was difficult, just because we moved from a place that was very well-funded technology-wise. We had, a computer lab with printers and monitors and the best of everything. And when I started at Northwest, they didn't have a local area network. There were really only a couple PCs here and there, and I'm not sure that, they had more than actually one legally licensed copy of Office. So, and I remember one of our early computer projects that I was genuinely excited about was, I got some networking cable and hooked it up so that we could share the same little printer that we had, and that was
a big deal.
That was a big deal.
Yeah.
It was very exciting because then we wouldn't have to keep writing everything to floppies and moving it back and forth.
And this was 94?
Into 94.
Yeah.
Yep, in 94. So healthcare as an industry has tended to lag other industries as far as their adoption of IT, of information technology, and that was certainly true at the time at Northwest.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's just a resistance. It's it's a very people-centric, caring environment, and it historically hasn't been something that there's been a lot of focus on. It's also it hasn't been a real proven use of information technology. There have been many healthcare institutions that have spent a lot on computers without really seeing the demonstrated return.
Yeah, and a lot of insurance companies have had some pretty major failures in terms of implementing automation.
Yes.
So you were hired as a research assistant, but you still ended up working on the computers.
Yep.
How did that happen?
Well, part of my job was to, as we said, screen these patients, collect the data, and then of course the data needed to be analyzed, but before it could be analyzed, it needed to be entered. And well, when you're the research assistant, that was my job, was to sit there and key in the data. And in addition to that, I was learning a lot about the physical therapy department where this research project was housed, and I could see the time and energy that the therapists spent on all the paperwork associated with the care process. And so one of the things that I did was set down to automate the process where the therapist would put their note into the computer directly, their assessment of the patient, and then I was able to extract the data that I needed for the research project straight out of that documentation, while at the same time generating some forms and output that they needed to submit for billing purposes.
So you basically got them to do the data entry for you?
Basically.
Yeah.
And it worked out well, and for all of us, I think.
And then you eventually did a project where you started tracking their productivity. Did they like that at all?
I don't know that they really loved it.
Most people don't like having their productivity
No, most
tracked.
people don't love having their productivity tracked, but the department, again, this was a good learning experience. The department was not doing that well financially, and the times were a little tight, and it was really important for us to begin analyzing who was helping the bottom line and who was seeing enough patients and who needed to maybe try and see a couple more. And so I worked to automate that process.
Did you have anything to do with the political side of that in terms of trying to convince them that this could be used as a good tool and not something that's there to fire people, or did you just build it?
I built it and tried to lay low on that. And there was a manager whose job it was to sell it, and I left it at that.
Did you actually apply for a project manager position, or did it just kind of fall into your lap?
It sort of fell into my lap. So I had, as I mentioned, I had wrote this little program that we used to collect the clinical data. And at the same time, Northwest, the administration of Northwest, had really decided it was time to replace their information technology infrastructure. And they had just begun a systems vendor selection, and that had been going on for a period of time, and the executive in charge of that project came down to see my little work, and I thought, oh, wonderful, he's really interested in what I'm doing, but who knows what. And then the manager in the department where I was working said, oh, someday you'll go up and work for him, and I was like, oh no, that won't be me. But sooner or later, he asked whether or not I wouldn't like to come up and work for him.
Now, had he come down there to sort of take a look at you?
Yeah.
But you didn't know that?
I think I was completely oblivious to it. I just thought, oh, isn't this sweet that he's all interested in what I'm doing? And I wanted, I think I had put in a requisition. I'd written up a little proposal about what it would take to expand my little program, and I needed a couple things, and I'd written up a proposal on how I was going to do that.
Yeah, the naivete of a liberal arts education.
Yes, exactly.
Business school students would always know what that was for.
Yeah.
And were you ready to make that move when it was offered to you?
Yeah. I had loved working where I was, but definitely saw this as an opportunity to move up and, move out of there was definitely some sort of pay increase with it that, sounded good.
Was kind of nice.
And he seemed like a good guy. I asked around what he would be like to work for, and I thought this could work out okay. And I don't know that I gave it a ton of thought. Thought, okay, this sounds okay.
Why not?
Why not?
Yeah, because I mean, if you really look back at it now with a more professional eye, you realize it was actually quite a move. You're working for somebody much more senior in the company, and you're also doing work that you really weren't as prepared for as you were for the other job. Did you recognize those things at that point, or you just knew this was a bigger paycheck and he seems like a nice guy?
You know, I don't think in retrospect that I recognized how perhaps unqualified on paper I was. I had many things to offer the project, and I still feel I did a good job and did the organization a service. But with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, I would say that, you know, there were a number of experiences that would have helped. And if I were hiring for that role today, I would probably seek someone with a bit more experience in the industry.
Which industry?
In the sort of healthcare information systems industry, just who, you know, my primary job at the time was to help them pick a vendor. The hospital was going to adopt a philosophy of having a single vendor who provided their core information systems.
And core information systems are what?
They are the systems that run the entire hospital. They admit a patient, they track your demographics, they collect the orders that we place on you while you're a patient, the laboratory orders, the x-ray. They collect the charges associated with that, help us send out a bill. They report the results of your tests to the physician who's treating you. So they run the lifeblood of the hospital, and hospitals are increasingly automated these days. So.
And was it your concept to bring in the single vendor, or they had already decided that they were doing that?
They had pretty much already decided that, but we sort of revalidated that as a direction, and I think it was important to recognize that as a small to medium-sized hospital that with a single vendor, we were going to be in a big deal, meaning we were going to buy a lot of systems from them. We would be able to get some leverage that we wouldn't get if we went out to the market and tried to buy a best-of-breed solution, where we were then going to not have much leverage with each vendor and also incur the expense of interfacing them all.
And also, you're a fairly small IT shop, so if you have to do best-of-breed, you have to learn more different things,
Absolutely.
Which is really complicated. Yes. Tell us about the agreement that you ended up working out with the vendor.
It was a long, and that was, you know, something that we live with today. Every day I'm still working on that agreement. The agreement we negotiated in '95 was a 10-year agreement that allowed us a broad licensing rights with the vendor and contracted for a defined set of functionality that was to be delivered, and whether it came in certain products or other products, it really didn't matter so much, but the hospital did a good job of committing in the contract to what did we expect the functional aspects of the system to be, and then left it to the vendor to decide how to provide those.
Now, you didn't really have a lot of experience with writing contracts and things like that. How did you figure out how to do that?
Well, for starters, we had the benefit of great legal counsel who I've learned a ton from over the years. And, you know, as you work on different things over the years, you discover that some of them you have a natural aptitude and you like doing, and legal agreements is one of them that I happen to really like. And the lawyer that we worked with is a phenomenal negotiator, so that really helped.
Part of this job was to deal a lot with the board of directors. What were some of those meetings like?
Those meetings were very important. This was an enormous capital commitment for the hospital, one of the largest capital commitments they had made in years, and particularly the largest of its kind for IT. So I spent a lot of time educating the board, many of whom were not all that familiar with technology, about what were some of the differences between the vendors, what criteria could we apply during the selection process, and then working with them to sort of talk about what the implementation process was going to be like, that this wasn't just like installing Microsoft Office, that there was going to be a long implementation process where the staff would need to be trained and the system built and tested.
Now, I'm sure there must have been some growth happening here, because the last I heard, you're sort of building these little systems to help productivity. How are you now standing in front of a board and talking to them about what needs to be done for fairly major implementations? How did you do that? You know,
I was fearless. I just was really fearless. I thought nothing of it. Bill would, the man I worked for then and now, would say, you know, I want you to come along to this meeting next week and tell him about how the project's going along. Or he had me put together a storyboard to sort of walk them through the project. And he would just say, you know, come to the meeting, and he would introduce me, and I would just roll with it. And I think I was sort of a naturally organized person, so I was able to sort of describe to them the process we were using and assure them that we did have criteria that we were using to pick the vendor.
Was the IT staff ready for this level of change?
No, I think that was a really difficult thing for the staff. The staff that had worked there was predominantly a programming staff. They had been doing a lot of in-house development and custom maintenance on the system that Northwest had for the past 10 years. And so they saw themselves as programmers, and when we were shifting to a vendor-supported environment, that really made a lot of changes for them. Likewise, we were moving from a dumb terminal environment to a PC-based environment, so there were a lot of technological changes going on at the same time that required a lot of new training. And for them, some of them looked forward to the change and some of them didn't.
And how about the users? Were they looking forward to the change?
Some were and some weren't. It was really a mix, and I think people's expectations were very, very high, so managing the expectations of the end users was something that really you had to keep an eye on.
So were you personally responsible for all the change management, or was there somebody else handling that and the communication and all that comes with such a really dramatic change?
Mm-hmm. I was responsible for most of it and certainly called upon others in the organization. And you know, in retrospect, I think we would have done the implementation slower and more gradually, but there were certain technical limitations that didn't allow us to do that. So we had sort of a big bang go live in 1996, and it was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
But we roughed it out, and I think as an organization, we had to go through it.
Did you get any blame for the fact that it was this awkward thing, or did you just kind of go in stride?
If I did, I don't remember it.
You blocked that part out.
I have an amazing ability to block out that I don't want to remember.
How would you define your style during this time?
Well, I think I was pretty aggressive. I was pretty fearless, pretty aggressive, pretty hard driving, and probably a little rougher than I would be today.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an enormous project, and we had limited staffing, and in retrospect, I think there was a trade-off. You got a lot of energy from me out of it, and that's what we needed. What
were some of your influences in terms of how to approach this kind of thing, and what kind of style to take on?
Well, I think in some ways I was influenced. My husband was working for Microsoft, a sort of a very aggressive go, go, go environment, and so I would sort of listen to what he was hearing at work, and not really having a lot of other work experiences, I thought, yeah, go, go, go. And also I was young, really energetic, didn't really have much of he was working all the time, so we didn't have a lot of family time. So I had plenty of time to be go, go, going at work, dawn to dusk.
So after 2 years in the project manager role, you ended up being promoted to director. Now, in order for that position to open up, the beloved IS director had to leave. How did that come about?
Well, during the system implementation, we had restructured the department, hired on quite a number of new staff, different skill mix to support the new systems, more application analysts than we had had in the past, and certainly more help desk staff, PC technicians. So gradually over time, the staff had changed. And I think that he understood that there was a time we were going to have a leadership change as well, and so we finally made that change. But I was worried about it, and it was a difficult thing for me to do. I had never I'd never had to do that before, and I was nervous about it. I think he was relieved and just was waiting to leave. But when I sat down to meet with him, I was certainly nervous about it, and he knew it was coming and just said it was time to go.
Well, it seems kind of odd because you're sort of not in that position, but you are in that position. Did you get any coaching on how to handle that situation?
Yep. I remember talking with the human resources director quite a bit. She was an enormous help, and she had sort of walked me through, told me what to expect, and Bill was a help as well as one of the trustees sort of gave me a little advice about how they'd like to see it handled.
Because it seemed, so were you sort of promoted above this person and then had to?
Yes.
Ew.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he worked in a different role. He stayed on working in a staff role for a while, supporting one of the newer systems, and he did a really good job with that. But over time, I think it was just time for him to move on, and we made that switch.
When you look at managing this scale of a project, how did you figure out which order to do things in? Did the vendor really help you figure that out, or was there a natural progression?
The first major phase of implementation, we worked with the vendor to define a schedule, but that was something that I remember spending a ton of time on personally, that I was really driving the schedule and how things sequenced and how they were intertwined together. So I remember spending, it was a collaborative effort.
And then how did you go about creating a more customer-focused organization?
Well, that was an evolution. When I arrived there, it was the perception of, I mean, it was called data processing. It wasn't called information systems or information technology.
Whereas most companies had made that shift 10, 15 years earlier.
Precisely, but again, healthcare lags, and Northwest had they had saved a lot of money. So on the one hand, they hadn't been investing in their systems, but on the other hand, they had saved a lot of money. They had funded other capital needs in the organization. So we made that shift slowly, but it was a shift in people, a shift in technology, and Bill really saying, I want to run the Nordstrom's help desk and start thinking service. And so we really went to a 7 by 24 hour help desk, did a lot of training, a lot of end user training and support, both for the employees as well as the medical staff, who at the same time were having to sort of come to grips with the fact that a computer was going to be a part of their practice of medicine.
I think sometimes you forget, as you're working on predominantly billing systems, you forget that a lot of that is really tied to patient care.
Yes.
And I know at Microsoft, when I was working there, our running joke when something ended up being a day late or 2 days late was, we don't work for a hospital. You do work for a hospital. So did the IT staff really sense the need to take it that seriously?
I was passionate about. I spent a lot of time coaching and talking, particularly during the boom years later, when we had a lot of people moving around amongst companies, but trying to recruit people who have an interest in working in IT in healthcare, because we do have unique demands. It is not okay. Everyone expects their IV pump to work all the time, and guess what? Our computers need to work all the time. So we can't have this downtime that other industries tolerate. And so we don't tolerate a lot of downtime.
Yeah. One of the other things that you did during this time was you made a complete infrastructure change, which needed to be done in order to support the new systems. You still have you personally have a fairly low level of technical experience. How did you go about making decisions regarding infrastructure?
A lot of reading up, a lot of studying up, a lot of asking the right questions. I think that it's really possible to be a good manager in the technical realm without a ton of technical knowledge if you're very careful about what questions you're asking and you have an aptitude for learning it. And so I did a lot of studying up, reading up, and generally sort of go after the approach that if I ask a technical person something and they can't explain it to me, then I actually see that to be a sign of something not 100% quite right. Because those who really understand it are then usually able to really explain it to you.
Yeah, well, that's a good litmus test. Within the next few years, you were promoted to CIO and then later given the title of Vice President. How did those different title changes impact the scope of your responsibilities?
The shift from director to CIO didn't really shift the scope of my responsibilities all that much, but I certainly welcomed the title. It helped me interact with my peers in other institutions, and I think healthcare as an industry was just starting to adopt the use of that title, and as others had it was helpful to have that same title in order to interact with others who were doing a like function in another organization.
And then the VP responsibility?
I think the VP responsibility brought on with it additional administrative responsibilities associated with the senior management team of the hospital, broader input, more input and involvement in other business decisions, not IT decisions in the hospital. But over this time, Bill had also moved from a VP role himself to the president and CEO, and as he assumed that role, I also continued to help him with other projects.
Right about this time, Y2K was starting to rear its ugly head. Was this a large undertaking for your organization?
Definitely. It was a large undertaking from an IT perspective, but also from all of our biomedical equipment, which was an enormous area of concern for us. And I headed that effort. It was a wonderful project.
How did you untangle that all?
With good organizational skills, and we just broke the project down. We had a good inventory of our devices, and that just systematically walked through and moved both the devices and our application systems up into a compliant state. And we also used it as an opportunity to test and re-drill our emergency preparedness systems within the hospital, which traditionally have been very clinically focused, sort of targeted at the patient care disaster scenario, but we used those to really tune up and drill around there are many other kinds of disasters that can happen in a hospital, and we need to be ready for them.
One of the things that I know you ended up facing was the difference in projects in times of prosperity versus times in reduced profitability. How do IT projects differ in each of those times?
I think in times of prosperity, you probably have funding to take on the sort of bells and whistles kind of projects, the fun stuff. And in tighter times, you really need to focus on absolutely, because every dollar that's spent on IT is a dollar that could have been spent on something in the patient care arena. So we really need to make sure we understand that the items we're spending money on in information technology are really contributing to the core of the hospital business. And we've tried to do that. I've also tried, sort of as a philosophy of IT spending to coach the organization over the years, instead of a sort of a feast or famine approach to spending on IT. We had a long famine. And then we had a big feast for a few years, and now we've really moved into what I think is a much more sustainable approach to IT spending, and it's a lot easier on your staffing budgets and other support budgets, where we have a sort of an annual commitment to IT that's a more leveled out commitment.
I think also having been in times of those famine periods gives you some skills at having to define projects and defend projects.
Absolutely.
And you hope that those kind of carry through if you've got the leadership that asks those questions every day.
Absolutely.
Not just when they absolutely have to.
Right.
Within 2 years, business development was added to your responsibilities. What does that entail?
Business development is about growing our revenue side. We had a rough financial year in 2001. 2000. Year 2000, we had a really rough financial year. All of healthcare has been facing real hard times recently. The government has cut a lot of our reimbursement. So we spent quite a bit of time focused on cost containment. It's the first thing you tackle. But the second part of that equation is we really need to look at how we're growing our revenues. Which service lines are needed, which ones, what does the community need as far as their healthcare needs, and how can we better meet those? So I've been now spending a lot of time looking at projects in that direction.
How did your role in IT prepare you to focus on business development?
A lot of IT management is excellent project management, and a lot of business development is a series of projects. And so I think my project management skills come and are leveraged directly into that other arena. And those are the most transferable skills. If you're a great project manager in IT, you can be a great project manager in pretty much any area.
I also think that when I think of the two disciplines, that IT is so focused on the broad organization, more so than some other areas like marketing, and so that really prepares you.
Well, I think it did prepare me. It prepares me to look at a lot of things. As we installed all of these systems throughout the years, I have exposure to and knowledge of almost every working area of the entire hospital, because we've pretty much since 1994 replaced almost every single system in every area, which during each one of those implementations is a time to review the process, review the business needs of this department, review how things are carried out here. And so I have a great foundation of how things work in the hospital.
Well, throughout your career at Northwest Hospital, so much of your job has been involved in dealing with the board, but never more so than now. How have they been throughout and currently about accepting someone of your age and gender?
I think that was a challenge. I was very young when I started, and
you still are.
I'm still very young, and though I start to feel at least I'm not the youngest person at work anymore. But I think that was very difficult for them to really come and trust that. On the other hand, I think they recognized that the technology field was largely populated with people who tended to be younger. And so that helped me, but I still believe that it is a barrier to be a very young person. You have just sort of a natural lack of common area of interest with an older generation, and so I worked hard to bridge that, and I think I've been fairly successful at it. I really don't feel it's an issue so much anymore, but it was an issue when I started.
You said you worked hard to bridge it. What did you do?
Try to, number one, fulfill my duties to be an expert in the areas that I was being asked to comment on. That was my number one responsibility to the organization. And secondly, trying to seek out areas of common interest with the trustees. And the age difference came up not just with the trustees, but also with my peers, and as I would interact with other hospitals and other CIOs. They're predominantly older. So try to seek out some area of common interest. Unfortunately, sometimes it was their kids that were my age, but I found that almost everyone likes to talk about their kids, so
Right.
that sometimes is a good bridging area.
You recently learned an important lesson about dealing with the board in terms of not being too open. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that the lesson I learned is that, number one, I think it's important to remember the hierarchy in an organization. Not that Northwest is particularly hierarchical, but that if you have any concerns with your role or the environment, that you should really take them up directly with your direct supervisor. And I had an experience where I felt that some of the comments that I had made maybe were misconstrued, and perhaps in retrospect, maybe they just shouldn't have been uttered at all. And so that was a real learning experience for me just recently, and I think I need to think before I speak.
How would you describe your current management style?
You know, I think my current management style is still quite detail-oriented, and I like everyone to know the details, and I like to be efficient. So I like to see people using a lot of critical thinking. If I'm asking questions, I ask a lot of questions, and I don't mind if people ask me a lot of questions, but I'd like to ask the questions and really feel assured that the person I'm working with on a project really has investigated the detail and is ready and prepared, and then I feel very comfortable delegating and moving on from there. So I think that I'm also just, perhaps a little less quick to jump to conclusions than I was earlier.
Yeah. Who are some of your role models?
Certainly Bill, who I've worked for over the years. I've learned endless things from Bill, many of them about how to be a better communicator, when is the right time to say certain things, and when is it perhaps better to just sit on that thought for a little while, how things that, even while true, could be misinterpreted. I think Dr. Schradel, who I've worked with over the years, likewise is an ER physician. He's incredibly calm under pressure. He just never, even in the face of direct conflict, he remains just undeterred, and I think that that's something that that's been a role model for me.
You've spent your whole career, basically, to date at the hospital. Why have you chosen to do that?
Well, many times I've thought about leaving, and is it the time to move on? But I've stayed really most times because it's a constantly changing environment, and I'm constantly learning new things. And over the years, I've been given a ton of new opportunities, which have allowed me to grow and have great new experiences. And I don't know that I could get better experience anywhere else. So and I really enjoy working at Northwest. So I think for me to leave, I'd have to really see something that gave me something compelling that I couldn't get at Northwest. And right now, I feel like almost every area of my career can be enhanced by staying there.
Does the culture of the hospital sort of inherently match your temperament?
No, not at all. I think that I think healthcare and the culture of Northwest is perhaps a little more genteel than my sometimes aggressive style, and I tend to be probably more energetic, a little more direct than sometimes people are comfortable with. But I think that's something that I bring as value to the hospital. And sometimes they say that I'm the resident skeptic. So in senior management, and that's sort of, I like to question things and think about them. I'm pretty analytical and gather all the facts, and then if it really looks good to me, then I'm every bit as enthusiastic as the next person.
So do you sort of like being this sort of bull in a china shop where your temperament is so different from everybody else? Is that a plus or a minus?
I'm not sure. I think some days it's a plus and some days it's a minus. I think it'd be easier to be probably surrounded by people who are more similar to me in background. But I like the challenge, and I think I have an incredible commitment to working in healthcare and in the nonprofit sector. One of the things that I was really influential to me was at Princeton. They gave us a book and they had a little motto about in the nation's service, and that spirit of giving back after you get this wonderful education, of giving back to the community, and that there are so many ways to give back to the community besides going and working for a for-profit or a bank or a developer or somebody. That I think that particularly for me, it's been very rewarding to say that this is an industry that desperately needs better automation, and this is a hospital where I can really make an impact because it's not so small that we can't afford to do great projects, but not so big that I can't have a really big impact.
You talked about how the hospital has continued to keep you challenged. Do you ever consider getting an advanced degree, or do you feel that that wouldn't be a real asset at this point?
I think that getting an advanced degree would be something that I would do for my own benefit, not something that would benefit the hospital. And I'm not sure at this point whether it would really open any doors for me career-wise, certainly not at the hospital. But I have thought about it over the years. But I think just now, at this point in my life, it's a difficult thought for me to think about going back to school.
Yeah. When we talked about the board, you talked about the sort of the age issues. You didn't really talk that much about being a woman presenting in front of the board. Have there been any other challenges for you as being a female executive within the environment that you're working in?
You know, I don't think major challenges. I think that working not only as a young woman, as I mentioned, there's sort of a natural gap between, you know, I was a 25-year-old female and I would go to dinner with a group of other CIOs and they're 60-year-old men. So not that they aren't welcoming to me, but there's not also a ton in common that we have as far as other interests and other things to talk about. So I think that was mainly the issue. I don't think that I found that being a woman has been any kind of a barrier for me.
Is it ever appropriate to cry at work?
No, it's never appropriate to cry at work, but boy, have I done it. And boy, you know, every time I do it, I come home and my husband says, there is no crying at work. And sometimes I just get really flustered and I'm really passionate about my work. And if I just feel like something's not going right, I've been known to cry. And sometimes Bill looks at me, he goes, oh, and you're getting all glassy-eyed. And
don't do that.
Don't do it. So it's something that I need to work on.
Yeah.
So
sort of unnerves the people around you, which
it makes everyone else uncomfortable, and I can't believe that I've done it, and so I need to work on that.
Is it possible for women to have it all?
I think that's a very difficult question, and you know, I think I was certainly raised in a generation where we really believed that we, as women, we could go to the same schools, we could get into the same clubs, we could have every bit the same educational experience, and I really don't feel there are barriers in the workplace, not significant ones, I'm sure there are isolated ones, but there really are no barriers in the workplace to achieving whatever you want career-wise. That said, I now have a child, and there aren't enough hours in the day, and so I've sometimes in the last year felt cheated that no one really prepped me for the fact that you can't have it all, not unless you've got a way to get that
right.
9th and 10th day into the week. And that's a real frustration for me currently. It's something I struggle with every day.
Yeah. I used to think about that a lot and wonder whether women can have it all. And then I realized that the phrase have it all didn't mean what I thought it meant, is where I've kind of come to it now that I'm a parent, because I used to think that have it all meant having a career and having a family. And now I realize have it all means having a career that you love and being a present parent
Yeah.
in that way.
Yeah.
And you can't do both of those.
No. And it's limiting in what type of career you can choose. I think there are numerous studies that you always see studies of percentage of female executives or percentage of females on the board who traditionally came from prior executive lives. And, you know, you see all sorts of discussion of what the barriers to them to getting there, but I actually don't think that there's been an adequate press about it. Wasn't that there were barriers along the way that prohibited these women from rising through the ranks, but rather that they themselves likely chose to
Right.
place their family needs above the needs of the company. And so they self-select typically away from executive roles into roles that will allow them to work part-time or on a more flexible schedule or eliminate travel or evening work. So I think that that's something that isn't adequately addressed, and there's really no easy answer to it. And there are certainly no one's going to be having a sob pity story for me in that, you know, I have it pretty nice. There are lots of people out there who work and have a much more challenging environment than I do, but I really feel for them, and I think that's something that we as a society still have to struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, I think the concept of choice is really important because you're right. A lot of them, nobody's telling them you can't have this job. They're just saying you can't have this job and not travel because it's part of the job. You make the choice. And perhaps that's different than the way it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, but you can't do both. It's just not possible.
You can't be in two places at one time, and your child needs you home, and they need to see you and be with you every day, and so that helps limit your career options. And I think that's very unfortunate for me personally. But I'm very lucky in that my current job has been very accommodating since I became a mother, and I'm thankful for that, and continue to struggle every day to make it work.
Yeah. My student researcher spoke to several of your family and friends and colleagues, and they asked each of them where they saw you in 5 years, and to a person, they all responded, wherever she wants. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
You know, I don't know. I don't know where I'll be in 5 years. You know, I didn't do a lot of conscious planning over the years of where I would be next or what should I do next. And I'm not sure where I'll be in 5 years. I might be continuing to work in healthcare administration, or I could be a stay-at-home mom. And I'm just not sure what's in the cards right now, whether I'll be able to continue to juggle both or not.
We'll be back to take questions from the audience right after this break.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
What's the hardest skill you've had to learn in your professional career?
I would say probably related to managing people. It's not something that comes as naturally to me. It's something that I had to work more on. And as I said, I'm probably not the most tolerant person about people who are whining and sort of not self-correcting on their own. And so, that's something that a manager really has to be there to support their staff with. And so I've worked hard on figuring out how to work with each individual to see what motivates them so that I can set up a program that they're going to be happy working on.
I'd like to close with a quote that's kind of a composite of several of the people that we spoke with. Annika is the consummate decision maker. Maybe this comes from her parents, who were both mathematicians. She believes that things can be proven and quickly assesses good from bad, right from wrong. She has an incredibly short learning curve. But she's not only strong strategically, she's also great at implementation. She really knows how to put things in action and get the ball rolling on stalled projects. She constantly raises the bar to challenge herself and her staff, and has brought true respectability to the IT organization.